Shayna Hubers shot Ryan Poston to death. Shayna claimed that she and Ryan had been in a fight and that he had physically picked her up and carried her out of his condo, and that she had ran back inside to grab some of her things, and that he had followed her inside and grabbed a gun off of the table, and that she had then grabbed the gun out of his hand and in doing so pulled the trigger. That was her initial statement. She then said that she waited 10 or 15 minutes before calling the police. And why did she wait 10 to 15 minutes? Because she actually didn't call the police first. Before calling the police, she called her mother. Now, her mother says she testified that Shayna was terrified, hysterical, and in shock, and that she told her daughter, like, call 911 and tell them exactly what happened. But the prosecution believes that she called her mom first so that her mom could tell her what to say, so she could build her narrative around what actually happened. So police arrive and Shayna comes out front with her hands right in front of her, just like the 911 operator told her, and she gets down on the ground and they arrest her. And while one officer is arresting her, another officer goes inside, and this is where they find Ryan dead next to the dining room table. He had been shot times, and immediately Shayna claimed that it was done in self-defense. So she's taken down to the station, and immediately they think that she is being shady as hell. So basically they sit her down and she's like making a sound where it sounds like she's like crying or wailing or trying to make herself cry, right? And they're like, okay, cool, you sit here, we'll be right back. Everything's fine. She's crying, she's crying. They walk out, they close the door, and immediately the tears stop. They describe it as like a light switch, like wham, wham, wham. They walk out, boom, nothing else. And she literally, like, I watched the clip. She's like crying. As soon as the door closed, she's just like, oh, and looks down at her nails. From that moment, police knew that she was lying, that everything that she was saying was an act, that she was being a fake. So they really started to take notice. And they noticed that through the whole interview, she seemed like she was crying. She tried to make herself look like she was crying, but no tears ever came out of her eyes. They then tell her, like, okay, do you want to talk, blah, 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 whatever, policing. And she says she wants an attorney. So they're like, fine, that's cool. You can have an attorney, just know we can't ask you any questions, so that's gonna be that. We'll get you an attorney. And even though she asked for an attorney, she couldn't stop herself from talking. They never asked her any questions, but it's like the floodgates opened and she just could not stop. She word vomited all over those cops for a prolonged period of time. She talked about what happened, how it was self-defense, how she was a Christian. She told one of the cops he had pretty teeth. She asked if she could shower in jail or what, and she asked them like what they were gonna do with her. And she talked for 3 straight hours. It was like 2 hours and 45 minutes, but that's basically 3 straight hours of just talking with no questions being asked. She started going on to talk about Ryan, to tell the story of his alleged abuse against her. She said that he had pulled guns on her as a joke before, and that he had hurt her, making her hit her head into the headboard, and she just felt like she could have died. But as she was telling the history of Ryan's alleged abuse, she was also retelling the story of what happened tonight, and each time she started talking about what happened that night, her story kept changing. So Ryan owned a lot of guns. He was a gun guy. He was licensed to carry, and he was said to be the type of guy that had one in his boot and one on his hip, like in a holster. Like, he was a gun guy. And he had a habit of coming home from work, from the office, and just taking the gun out and setting it on his table. One thing about Shayna's story that kept changing so much was about this gun, the gun on the table in particular. She had several different stories about how she came to be holding that gun. First, in the 911 call, she said that, he had picked up the gun and that she had taken it out of his hand and pulled the trigger in doing so. In another interview, like later during her interrogation, she said that she had picked the gun up herself off the table when he started like waving his arms and saying crazy things. And in another telling at her second trial, which, spoiler alert, yes, second trial, we'll get there, she said that she had been on the floor and that she tried to get up and that he had pushed her back down on the ground and that he pointed the gun at her and said that he could kill her right then and nobody would have any idea what happened to her. She said that she was shocked and scared and didn't know why she deserved this behavior. She said that he then put the gun down and kept saying hurtful things, and that she had been on the floor and she had gotten up and grabbed the gun and shot him because as she started to stand, he had started to stand and reach across the table, and that she didn't know if he was reaching for the gun or if he was reaching for her. But for this story to be true, the trajectory of the bullet that went through him would have had to have been from like a downward angle going up, right? Because she's on the ground, she's shooting upwards. but the trajectory of the bullets that hit Ryan were coming from an upward angle, going down through his body, like she was standing over him. So many things changed in Shayna's story, right? But the one thing that remained consistent is that Shayna shot and killed Ryan. She said that when she first shot him, he was laying with his face on the table, and at that moment she knew he was going to die, so she said she like circled the table and then shot him again, this time in the head, and at this point he fell onto the ground. She said at this point his glasses were still on. She remembered that note, so she decided that she wanted to make sure he was dead by shooting him because she couldn't stand to sit there and watch him die. The prosecutor later said of this, and I quote, "He laid there helpless, and she walked over and shot him. That's not self-defense." So police come back in and they're like, "Okay, Shayna, listen, here's what's gonna happen next. We're gonna be arresting you for murder, obviously." And she's like, "What degree?" That was her response. So she was arrested, and I saw different reports on what bail was set as. A couple of reports said that bail was set at $1.5 million, and I did see a couple of reports that said that she didn't get any bail, so I am confusion. It took 2.5 years for Shayna's trial to begin, and once the trial started, Shayna entered a plea of not guilty to her charges. The defense did the best they could to show that Shayna killed Ryan in self-defense, that she was a victim of domestic violence, and that she just did whatever she had to do to get out of that situation alive. The prosecution said that the motive was the complete opposite, that it wasn't Shayna that was trying to get away from Ryan, that it was Ryan trying to get away from Shayna, and that she just simply couldn't have that she would not let him leave, and that she was very much the tale as old as time. If I can't have you, nobody can. They said that for every one text that Ryan sent Shayna, she would send him 100. The court also heard testimony from a friend of Shayna's, which is super when one of your friends testifies in a way that makes you look bad. This friend said that Shayna had been fantasizing about killing Ryan long before she actually did it. That she had talked about how Ryan was an evil person and that Ryan didn't care about her, and that Ryan and her had been at a shooting range, and she had texted her friend saying that she wanted to turn around and shoot Ryan and then just pretend it was an accident. And this was just 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks I believe, before he was murdered by her, before she actually did shoot him to death. They even heard testimony from one of Shayna's cellmates who said that Shayna would brag about what she did, brag about killing him, and that Shayna even confided in the cellmate with what she planned to do with her defense, that she wanted to claim that she was temporarily insane, but that she was too smart to get away with that she had an IQ that was Einstein level, and that instead she was going to go after the battered wife angle. In April of 2015, the jury was sent to deliberate, and after only 5 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict, and they had found Shayna guilty of the murder of Ryan Poston, and they recommended a sentence for her of 40 years. Now, Shayna did appeal her conviction, almost immediately. She was found guilty in April of 2015 and sentenced just a few months later, and by August of 2016, so the following year, her appeal had already been granted, and her conviction was overturned. Bro, I know. Apparently one of the jurors was a convicted felon, and per Kentucky law, a convicted felon cannot serve on a jury. So this gave the defense all the ammunition they needed to get a new trial, right? Shayna's second trial began in August of 2018, and in the second trial, Shayna gave very explicit details on her and Ryan's life, and also, again, tried to claim that she was abused both physically and she said that she and Ryan were into and she said that sometimes she felt like it went too far, and when she'd tell Ryan to stop, he wouldn't. However, texts were revealed that showed that Shayna was the one who would bring up doing these types of things, and that he straight up was like, I don't think I'd be into it. A psychologist with the defense who evaluated Shayna diagnosed her with narcissism and low self-esteem, but she was also diagnosed by another doctor as having unspecified bipolar disorder. But again, during the second trial, when the jury went to deliberate after 5 hours of deliberation, so the exact same amount of time as the first jury took, the jury came back, and this time they sentenced her to life in prison, not 40 years, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. So with the time that she's currently served, if I did the math right, she will be up for parole in 2032. When When the verdict was read, Shayna leaned over onto her attorney and just started crying, and then looked over at her mother and just mouthed the words, "I love you." That, my friend, is the story of the murder of Ryan Poston at the hands of his obsessive, on-again, off-again girlfriend, Shayna Hubers.